Hello. So in today's video, I'm going to be reviewing a book that I recently read by Miss Jennie Allen. This review will definitely be a lot shorter than my last review. So if you did watch my last book review on the Taurus book, thank you for your patience. This will be a lot shorter as promised. Let's get into it. I want to divide this video into a few different sections. So I'll divide this kind of into why I picked this book, my overall thoughts on it. I'll give a quick rating on the book. Of course, I'll talk about some specific highlights in the book, things that stood out to me. And then we'll go into some things that I didn't particularly love about the book. So the full title of this book is Find Your People, Building Deep Community in a Lonely World. Now, typically, this is not really the type of book that I would read, and it's ironic because my first book review also wasn't a book I would typically read, but I've been very serious about just stepping out of my comfort zone a little bit and doing just that, reading things I wouldn't usually read. How I picked this book, I actually didn't pick it. I was supposed to start like a mini book club with my friend. So she's the one who actually suggested this book. And I said, okay, sure, we can alternate. You'll pick the book this time, I'll pick the book next time. So this just happened to be a book that she chose. Funny thing is, we actually never got around to doing our little mini book club because she never finished the book. So, but I did. I'm here reviewing it, and I'll just make sure that she sees this video because this is my review. These are my thoughts on the book anyway. It was a short book. It didn't really take me too long to get through. Well, I'll take that back. It was a short book. It did take me longer than it should have to get through. I'll get into that in a moment. I did read the Kindle version. Get whatever version you like. You can find the paperback, you can get the Kindle. There may be an audiobook version available. I'm not 100% sure in this moment, but if I find out, I will put it somewhere on this video. Also, in the interest of saving and in the interest of respecting your time, please do check out the timestamps that will be listed somewhere on this video or in the notes below. Overall with this book, it did challenge me because I'm a person, and you know this from my last video, but I'm a person that's more of an introvert. I do value sort of my me time and all of that good stuff. So this book was a bit of a challenge because it made me consider the question, are we, it kind of made me think about if that's how we're meant to be, not in terms of being an introvert, because I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing to be an introvert or extrovert. But this book put a lot of emphasis on, as you can see from the title, how we need other people and how that's very necessary. Also, I will say this book it's written by a Christian author. There are definitely some religious references in the book. So keep that in mind. I wasn't expecting that with reading the book, but that was an interesting thing. It was challenging because it made me it made me sort of put a question mark in my head as far as, do we really need other people? Because sometimes you see people talking about that all the time in different avenues. Well, I don't really need people. I'm fine just being by myself. I don't need that. And so this book kind of challenges that. Is there a true need for that? So, that was kind of interesting, right? I always grew up with the answer being no, I don't need necessarily other people. I'm not talking about like a romantic relationship, but even just like in platonic relationships and things of that nature. So it was interesting. I will say by the end of the book, it did make me think about my relationships with other people, and it made me kind of value it a little bit more. And so since then, I actually have reached out to different people in my life, just kind of, just checking on them. And I think prior to reading this book, I was already wanting to invest more in relationships that are important to me, and this book kind of like added to that, if you will. So that was definitely something positive that came out of it. If I were to give this book an overall rating, I would say, let's see, out of maybe 5 stars, I would give it, honestly, maybe 2.5 out of 5 stars. It'd be right in the middle for me. There were some good points in the book, and I'll talk about specific highlights that I got from it in a moment. However, it was very heavy on the religion. So this would be some of the things that I didn't love about it. It was very heavy on religion. And mind you, not that I'm not a Christian, however, it was just very heavy on religion, and I didn't go into this book expecting that. I don't necessarily seek out books like that. So that was kind of interesting. But I would give it a 2.5. So I would take off some points for that. Also, Even though the book was short, I do think it could have been even shorter. I'm very much a get to the point type of person, so it could have been even a little bit shorter than what it was. Um, and so for those reasons, it did, like I mentioned before, it did take me longer to get through the book than it normally would have, because there was definitely a time I forced myself to continue reading it. And I definitely remember maybe 30-40% through the book, I remember thinking, oh, I might just mark this as like a DNF book, a do not finish book. But I don't like to do that unless it's an extreme circumstance. So I did end up finishing it. And I got some tidbits from it. I don't think this is a book I would ultimately read again. But some of the highlights, I don't have an issue like writing them down. That's usually what I do. I'll write down specific sentences in my iPad, and then I'll go back and read those specific sentences. Now, I actually already kind of touched on what I didn't love so much about the book. Now, as far as what I did enjoy, so right in the beginning, and you're going to see me looking down because I'm referencing kind of my notes on here. Right in the beginning, she ultimately has a chart, and it talks about levels of acquaintances, village, and then 2 to 5 close friends. And I'll put that on here. And it's really neat because she says that most of us are trying to go straight to from acquaintances to 2 to 5 close friends. She says that most of us are trying to skip directly from acquaintances directly to close friends, and we're trying to skip the village part. This was interesting because I'd never thought of it in terms like this before, but that does make sense to me. And she defines a village as a diverse community of consistent, interconnected people, right? And so when I think about that, it totally makes sense, because think about the places that you frequent. So maybe like the gym, especially if you're going to like gym classes like myself, you might start to see like some similar faces in there. So in a sense, that could become someone's village, right? It's a diverse community of consistent, interconnected people. It makes sense with the definition of a village. And the funny thing is, there's actually a friend that I met from the gym, and we started hanging out. We clicked. We, seemed to get along really well. And I actually met her from the gym, from somewhat of kind of a village, right? If you think about even high school, a lot of times it's easier for us to make friends in high school because that in a sense is kind of our village, if you go by that same definition, right? It's something that you're frequently visiting, and so you start to kind of see those familiar faces. So I never sat and thought about it, but it makes sense that your close friends tend to come from your larger village. But don't skip the part of finding your village. And I see that even on social media. I'm in a few different groups, and some of these groups, ladies will post things like, oh, I'm looking for a friend, or I'm looking for a bestie, and things like that. And that's exactly the point. They're trying to skip the village and go straight to close friends. And so that was extremely insightful to me. In fact, that was probably my favorite thing from the whole book. I could actually probably end the video right now. That was the biggest thing that I took away from this book. That's the biggest thing that will stick with me. And I found that very valuable and insightful. So definitely, like, after reading that, I was more interested in the book. But then, like I said, as I got to maybe 30-40%, I really had to push myself to kind of keep going. With that, she talks about specific numbers, and she says scientific studies, and I'll just read this word for word. There are scientific studies that show how many relationships we can manage and how we socially interact with people. Basically, we can handle a network of only about 150 people. That makes sense to me. That wasn't the biggest shock. Inside that 150 layers are layers of friendship that deepen with how much time you spend with a person and the degree of your relationship with them. Research should suggest that we can handle only 50 people in what we call our acquaintances. Within those 50 people, there are 15 people in our village. And within our village, we have a capacity to make about 5 of them our BFFs, our best friend forever. So that was really interesting to me. Those numbers they don't shock me, but I really like quantifying things and putting specific numbers because it makes it a lot easier for everyone to kind of understand. So I really like that part. It definitely gave me some food for thought, right? And so she talks about how much face time you have with a person determines essentially how deep your relationship will be with them. And again, that wasn't the biggest shock of my life to read, but I was encouraged to reach out to some people that I hadn't really reached out to. So with the help of this book, that was just kind of like a nice reminder. Okay. She goes into like her personal examples in this book, And so she was talking about a story which I won't get into, but she says there was a specific line where she said, suffering alone only makes suffering worse. And I think that's so true because a lot of times when you are going through something, when you are suffering or whatever the case may be, sometimes just talking through it with another person is so helpful, just to know that you're not alone. Even if they can't directly solve whatever problem you have, but just there's so much comfort in knowing you are not alone. So that was something that definitely resonated with me. She also mentioned genuine community is essential to living, but we have made it an accessory. And that's, I can say I'm definitely guilty of that. You know, not so much genuine connections, but I have made it an accessory, essentially relationships with other people. I'm 100% guilty of that. And so this book challenged me to think about my relationships with other people on like a higher level. And maybe we do need other people. It's not just a want, but maybe it is actually a need. So this book was quite interesting for me. And I'm curious if particularly other introverts will feel the same after like reading this book. I'm definitely curious to hear thoughts from other introverts specifically, because I'm sure a lot of extroverts will say, oh yeah, of course we need people. Like, I'm sure that's a factor for extroverted people. Also, she said, if people are in the center of our relational circle, we end up pulling on others to meet needs that they can't ever fully meet. And so it would make more sense if I read the sentence before this. So let me read that. The sentence before that is, if God is in the center of our relational circle, we will be fulfilled. And out of that fulfillment, we can bless others. But if people are in the center of our relational circle, we end up pulling on others to meet needs they can't ever fully meet. I think that's important because it is helpful to kind of place people in different categories, right? And so to think that one person can fulfill all of your needs is very flawed. And that doesn't matter what type of person they are in your life. And so that feeds into the idea of we do need people, right? Different people will help fulfill different things. And that's not a bad thing. That's very normal. There's some other parts in the book later that I'll highlight that kind of touch on that too, but I did like that. She goes on to talk about, she's comparing different countries, but when she talks about like the United States, she says independence has become the chief value in this country, and that is true. You know, we are very hyper independent here. I never thought of it as necessarily being a bad thing, but I will say I do, after reading this book and also after just reflecting on other things, like it wasn't solely the book, but the book added to it, it definitely did challenge my thinking about, you know, is there such thing as being too independent? And I do think that the answer is yes. I do think there's a such thing as being too independent. I do. I do think so. So then she talks about one of her friends and she says, Caroline taught me in short order that my little village here was going to, number one, come because of my neediness and desperation, not in spite of it, and two, be built in unexpected ways and with unexpected people. And that was quite interesting to me because a lot of times we might see like neediness as something bad, but that literally can help tie you in closer or help you find your village and your people, your close friends, right? It's not in spite of it, it is because of that, right? People, it is nice to feel needed, and it is nice to lean on others for support, and it's nice to have other people lean on you for support, and that's where other people come in. So that did stand out to me, and I liked it. And it's very true that you can meet people I can't even speak, build community in unexpected ways with unexpected people. I've definitely had that experience, and I think that just goes back to that old saying, no, never judge a book by its cover. There's so many stories I could give with that. Also, she says, if I didn't appreciate the unique roles my friends play in my life, I might be mad that my challenger friend doesn't encourage me more, or my wise friend isn't fun all the time. This is touching on a little bit what I said earlier, but this is so important, appreciating people for the different roles that they play in your life. If you know that you have a friend in your life, that this is the person you go to for advice and wisdom, that may not be the person you call on every weekend to go party or out, and you shouldn't, you know, have any ill will or ill feeling towards that person because they don't want to party with you. That's not how they're serving you in your life, right? Like, they're serving you for a different purpose. They're in your life to speak wisdom into you and things of that nature. So that can apply to so many different circumstances, but people can fulfill only certain parts, not all parts, and that's okay, that's normal, that's to be expected. And so that's why in this book she encourages us to have a community, a village, which is more than one person, because putting everything on one person is not fair to you, and it's also not fair to that person. I think about my own life, and I have a person that I have, actually my best friend, and she's so big on like words of affirmation. She's huge on that. I am not a words of affirmation person. If you're into the love languages, I am more acts of service for sure. And so, at a point in time, it definitely felt like draining to constantly, okay, let me affirm you with words. Let me affirm you with words. Let me affirm you with words. But then you also have to realize, okay, maybe that's just my role in her life, is to be that encourager. And that's how I can encourage her best. That's how she receives it best. And that's okay. I'm not serving that role with all other people in my life. I'm not often doing that with many other people. She's one of the only people in my life that I'm heavy on like the words of affirmation, because I know that she needs that and kind of craves that. Right? With other people, people might actually describe me as someone who gives tough love. And I do tend to kind of do that. So different people may bring out different things in you, and that's the beauty of it all. That is the beauty of just people being individual and people being unique. So, and then she touches that. She says, in each of my friends, there is something that only some other friend can fully bring out. And that is so true. A lot of times we'll see this even our friends are maybe like in a relationship, and maybe they start to become more tender and more lovey-dovey, and it's just like, oh, look at you being all kind of soft or something like that. And it's because that other person pulled that out of them. Sometimes we only see certain sides of certain people because of who we are, and then another person will see a different side of them because of who they are. So that definitely resonated with. She says she was talking about Rwanda government, and then comparing it to like the USA. And so she was talking about people that have a lot of resources and money and things of that nature versus those who don't. Actually, it wasn't her that said it, but she was quoting something that a pastor in Rwanda said. And he said, the more resources a person gets, the more walls he or she puts up, and the more lonely they become. I've never specifically thought about it in those terms, but I definitely can't think of examples. And I think, we all like, there's always that question, oh, does it get lonely at the top? So that's an interesting way to kind of word it for me. Then she talks about how, of course, people are not perfect. And so one line that she says is, you will never find the perfect people to do life with you, because those people don't exist. You will always be doing community with sinners. And I think that's so true, because it reminds us to give other people grace. Whether you want to look at this from a religious point or not, it doesn't have to be religious, but give people grace, right? The people in your village, the people in your community, they're not perfect. So whether you want to use the word sinners or not, they're not perfect, right? So always just give people grace the same way you would want grace given to you. So that was nice. I liked that one. Another line, if you are trying to make friendship an addendum to your busy schedule, it will never work. You have to build it as you're going. Relationships should arise out of your everyday places and your everyday activities. Proximity is a starting place for intimacy. And that definitely makes sense, right? That's why a lot of times it's so much easier to do things with people who are closer, like geographically and physically closer to you. If someone is only 10 minutes away from me, it's a lot easier to plan things and make things happen versus someone who's like, for example, my bestie that's in a different state. So proximity definitely is key. And I can understand why, when I was younger, I didn't really understand why it was a big deal for people to like move far away. Like I used to see that as super fun and super exciting to just have a fresh start and move somewhere else. But now as I get older, I can see the hesitancy, because proximity matters, right? And so when you move, you're far away from your village, your community, and that really does make a difference. And it might sound obvious, like duh, but it wasn't so obvious to me when I was a lot younger. But I am starting to kind of value that now. One thing I liked about it is she does give a few practical steps in here. So I will read one. And again, you guys, you have to be intelligent enough to take the parts of the book that serve you and don't take the ones that don't, right? So if you're like not religious or because honestly this book is very heavily religious, which was an issue that I actually had with it. That's why I only gave it 2.5 stars. Just replace the word God with something else that's less offensive for you, the universe or something like that. I'm not here to get into religion. I just take away the big picture. So she says, go, in an earlier part of the book, she says to write a list of acquaintances. So right here, she's saying, go back over your list of acquaintances and highlight 10 names of people you could see yourself investing in on a deeper level. Pray over those 10 highlighted names and ask God to help you decide on 3 to 5 people to pursue deep relationships with. Um, that's kind of a neat thing to me, right? Because when it comes to like writing lists and things like that, I'm very familiar and used to doing that with goals. With my goals, different tasks and things like that. But names of actual people, that's something I've never done. And I'll admit I have yet to do it even since reading the book, but it is something I highlighted and it is something that I do plan to do soon. In fact, I guess I can do it in the next, like very, very soon. But that does seem to be a neat thing, just writing down names of, your acquaintances and then going back in there and highlighting the people that you really want to invest and putting in the work to have deeper relationships with those people. So I did like that. She talks about how she went to like a football game with one of her kids, and basically she was kind of surrounded by like other parents, kids, and things of that nature, but essentially they were strangers to her, and she said, I needed to start viewing them as friends in the making. That was really interesting to me because I never think like that. When I'm out in public, when I'm in the grocery store, I'm at work with coworkers or things of that nature, I am not considering those people as possible friends in the making. But if you're someone that you're seeking to have deeper relationships with people, or you just want to have more relationships with people, you want to have more friends and friendships, then that is a great mindset to have. Start viewing strangers as possible friends in the making. It sounds simple, but I think that's pretty neat. Another line she says is, a village of people meeting different needs and loving you in different ways provides a fuller, richer way to live. And I love that, people loving you in different ways, because that is true. For example, when I was talking earlier about my friend that's like the words of affirmation person, that is how I express love to her in her preferred love language. So I'm loving her in that way. While other people in my life, they're getting love from me in the form of tough love. So they're getting love from more people than just myself, but they're getting love from many different areas. And I really do agree with that statement. That's actually probably one of my favorite lines in the book. I really like that. This was interesting. I didn't read the specific article, but she does cite the article in here. She says researchers say that to grow an acquaintance to a good friend takes clocking 200 hours together. And that is so interesting to me. Of course, it's not a shock to me that the more time you spend with someone, the closer you get. Yes, but I really like numbers and quantifying things, so I really appreciated her putting that in there. That was definitely food for thought. There was a line in there that I highlighted. One of her friends was just telling her, I want you to need me more. And I think sometimes people don't realize that because people are so concerned with, well, I don't want to be a burden on this person. I don't want to bring them more stress. But you'll be surprised at how many people want you to need them. So I did really. She says you will only be as close to a friend as you are vulnerable with her, which I love because vulnerability does bring you closer to a person, even though it's tough. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable. And I think that's so important, especially like in my age group this day and age, because a lot of people are like fine and content with doing life on their own. And I definitely was too, but I'm considering a shift in that. But I love that line. I really love that line as well. That might be like my second favorite line from the book, because it is true. Like the flip side of not loving, and again, not just romantically, but loving a friend, loving even an animal, the family members, yourself. The flip side of not loving is, yes, you won't get hurt, but you won't get anything. It literally says, like your heart won't be broken, which is what no one wants to have a broken heart, but your heart will also become unbreakable, impenetrable. Am I pronouncing that properly? Irredeemable. And so nothing can get in, nothing can get out. So that was definitely interesting food for thought. One thing that I thought was cool, she does give like tidbits on very practical things that you can do to build relationships with transparency. And so one of the thing that a simple thing she says is tell someone you like that you like them. So you can literally say, I like spending time with you. It sounds so simple and obvious, but you never hear that, right? Like I don't often hear that from in a non-romantic way. So I think simple things like that, start treating your platonic relationships and your non-romantic relationships almost as you would a romantic relationship. And I've started doing that, right? So it's embarrassing, but even for holidays, for Christmases, I usually wouldn't get my best friend anything, but these past few Christmases I have gone out of my way to get her something, right? So the same way that you would be a little bit more soft and giving and tender in a romantic relationship, still apply that to your non-romantic relationships that have probably been there a lot longer than your romantic relationship. So that was nice. Got quite dark in here. She talks about accountability. She says, at its core, accountability calls us to who we were meant to be through truth mixed with grace. I do like that. Nothing more for me to add to that. I just really like that line. She also says, when we don't have a village of interconnected, consistent teammates in our lives, we feel invisible. And when we are left alone and unbothered, we become the worst version of ourselves. I have mixed feelings on that because I do feel, and this is also me being an introvert, I do feel more energized and refreshed after being alone by myself. But I can understand some parts of this because there are other people that do bring out better sides of me. So I can't say I agree with this 100%, but I do agree with that statement only partially. I have mixed feelings about that statement, to be perfectly honest. When she's giving practical pieces of advice, things you can do directly in your life, one of the things that she says is ask your friend or friends if you can hold them accountable for anything. And that's a very direct approach, but I do like that. I think that's a nice tidbit, and that's something that we can all do. She quotes Proverbs, and she says, plans fail for lack of counsel. Proverb says, but with many advisors, they succeed. I do like that because you can come up with this great plan on your own. And this is one thing I've had to become better with as I got older, because when I was younger, I definitely thought that I knew it all. And I do consider myself pretty intelligent, and I do think I come up with pretty good plans. But I've noticed after consulting anybody else, it could just be one extra person, they might give me like a neat idea and I'm like, I didn't think about that. That's a nice thing. And so that's the benefit of other people, right? They have their own brains, and so they can give you like insight and counsel you on things. So I did like that statement as well. Towards the end, she says, friends won't fall from the sky. Friends are always made. And I like that because it implies that there's effort to put into it, right? So a lot of times I think we have this idea of, things will just naturally happen as they're supposed to, super organically. You don't have to put in too much effort. What's meant to be yours is yours. And while there is some truth to that, there's still effort that's required in any relationship, and a friendship is a relationship too. She talks about conflict, which I really liked, and she said, conflict is safe when you know you won't quit each other. And I love that so much because right now we're in a time where people will just cancel other people out and be done with them and quickly remove them from their life. And I think sometimes we take that to an extreme. But you've got to differentiate, I think, between different types of conflict, and that's a totally different topic beyond the scope of this video. But there are different types of conflict, and conflict is healthy in a relationship. It's like a normal part of any relationship, I think. So I really like that line. It's safe when you know that you won't quit each other. Okay, so going back to like the studies, she said, as reported in Psychology Today, he found that it took about 50 hours of interaction to move from acquaintance to casual friend, and 90 hours to move from casual friend to friend, and more than 200 hours to qualify as a best friend. So that is really interesting, and it makes you think, well, how many hours are you actually logging with your friends? Now, realistically, if you are, in different states or countries or something like that, I do think that like we have to consider FaceTime. I think that I would imagine, that that kind of counts as FaceTime, no pun intended, but that does kind of count for something, right? Because naturally it's going to be a lot harder to log 200 hours with someone that's in a different state versus someone who's 10 minutes down the road from you. She talks about different ideas for embracing the inconvenience of friendship, and she says, that you should be the one who says something like, I feel like things aren't right between us. Is there anything we should talk through? And I like that because to me, that's just the idea of initiating. It's great to be the one who initiate things. You don't have to always wait for other people to initiate first. So I like that line. There was a part where she was talking about how she was talking about finances and how like household dynamics have changed. And so she was saying the fewer things people shared, the more they individually had to buy. And when you hear that at first, you're like, well, duh, of course that just makes sense. But then it makes you start thinking about the benefits of like living together with like lots of other people, because there's different benefits to that, but also in that even just financial benefits, you're not buying all these things individually. And these companies have paid attention to that. And so they've changed their marketing tactics. They've changed what they're doing because they know that the USA is a very hyper like individualized, hyper independent country. And so that was some interesting food for thought for me. I am skipping a few other lines in here. She talks about parents towards the end, and she says, we all carry attachment issues into adulthood because we all have sinners for parents. And I love that because it reminds us to give grace to everyone, even our parents, right? Even our parents are not perfect. So I really it's just a reminder that like you're not alone. There's nothing wrong with you because you had a sinner for a parent. And if you don't like the word sinner, just say you had a non-perfect parent. No one had a perfect parent. So I really like that line, right? And so we all carry some issues into adulthood. And it makes us think like, unfortunately, our kids might as well, right? Like our kids might carry some issues into adulthood because of us, because we are not perfect. So that's an interesting. She talks about how going with giving grace to people. Another friend of mine says that she tries to react to patterns, not one-offs. So this is also talking about like giving grace to people. This is pretty self-explanatory, but people are allowed to have like an imperfect day. If it becomes a pattern, then it's an issue. If it's not a pattern, then give them a little grace. That's what that line kind of means. Then I'm kind of going backwards, but back to where she mentioned, suffering. When you suffer alone, suffering is worse. She says, while I maybe wouldn't be able to do anything to help remedy your awful memories or circumstances, something about articulating your pain to me, a willing listener, would lighten your load. And that's exactly right. The load somehow feels lightened when you just get things off of your. She talks about, and this is the last one, it's about inviting people into the small crevices of our lives. And so when you think about like the little seemingly boring things that we do every day, running errands, putting gas in your car, if you can invite someone to do that with you, boom, that's an opportunity to clock more hours with that person. Hey, do you want to just run some errands with me? And they might have errands to run too, and you're clocking hours together and building closer relationships. So these were just a few of the highlights. There were a few more in here, but I wanted this video to be I intentionally wanted this to be a lot shorter than my previous video. There's no reason that my reviews, sometimes I get so passionate and I can just talk about the books that I'm reading and what they mean to me and like scrutinize every little thing and overanalyze. But yeah, overall, it's not a book that I would pick for myself. I don't regret reading the book. I don't see myself going back to read the book again, but the parts that I specifically just highlighted, I do like those. Those do stand out to me. And the book has definitely given me some food for thought. So that's why I cannot say that I regret reading it. I hope that this was helpful. Hopefully this encourages you to, well, it doesn't have to encourage you to read or to not read the book, but I'm curious to know your thoughts on it. If anything that I said resonated with you, let me know if there's a specific book that you'd like for me to read and review, and I will see you next time.